Welcome back to Utah Family Law TV. I'm Eric Johnson, and today I'm going to be discussing custody evaluations in a specific area of recording interviews with the children themselves and with any of what are known as the collateral sources, other people that are also interviewed by a custody evaluator in the course of conducting the custody evaluation. So Dennis is someone who does conduct custody evaluations. He's a custody evaluator with some experience. And so Dennis, as I always do, before we get into the interview itself, for people that may be watching or listening and would like to learn more from you or perhaps utilize your services, would you give them your contact information, please?
My name is Dennis Tucker, licensed clinical social worker. My phone number is 801-979-0610. My website is nbeval.com. And my email is new.evals@gmail.com.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, we talked a little bit, we've corresponded in advance of this interview, and we've talked a little bit about what we're going to discuss. And that is in Utah, for people that are maybe contemplating a custody evaluation for the first time, we have these situations where there may be parents who dispute what the best custody arrangement or parent time arrangement is when it comes to the amount of time the children spend with each parent and when, or how they organize the pickups, the exchanges, the drop-offs, and that sort of a thing. And so in my experience, I've been practicing for more than 27 years now. We have these standards that have been set that I have never seen followed. And let me see if you've had that experience as well. A lot of evaluators don't even know some of these. So one of them is that you're supposed to get an evaluation done, and you, meaning the evaluator, the parents, the child, they're all supposed to work together. Obviously, an evaluator cannot be held responsible for uncooperative people. But the parties involved are supposed to get the evaluation done in 120 days or less. I have never seen a custody evaluation get conducted in 120 days or less. It's usually at least double or even triple that amount of time. And I've seen some that have gone on for literally years. I'm sure you've heard about this too. But we're not going to talk about that. But that's just one example of where we've got a standard that doesn't get followed. And then we have this weird standard that, in my opinion, is weird, that the evaluation interviews are not recorded. Now, I'm going to tell Dennis how I've had it explained to me, and more or less there are two main explanations. And Dennis, if you know of any other that you've heard, please let us know. But here's how I've had it explained to me by other evaluators. Here's how I've had it explained to me by judges and commissioners, and of course by attorneys. But attorneys, they'll say anything, self-serving stuff, where sometimes it's like they're not the best source. But I've heard from evaluators and from judges and commissioners that you should not record the interviews of children, and in some cases of any of the people interviewed, including adults who are collateral sources like principals, doctors, teachers, neighbors, coaches, pastors, any of those sorts of things, other family members, because there's this belief that if you are recorded, you'll be so self-conscious or afraid of repercussions if people such as the parents or others learn about what you said, that you won't be candid and truthful. So if you're recorded, you'll tend not to be completely honest. Whereas, and this is the thing that just blows my mind, if we don't record and just trust the evaluator to be completely honest with us and completely infallible as to memory or perception of what the child or the collateral sources do and say, then what will happen is when people realize, oh, I'm not being recorded, oh, well, then I'm happy to just be a fount of truth and candor, and I'll just tell you whatever you want to know, and I'll never hesitate to give you my honest opinions and recollections and that sort of thing. Because what happens is that children and collateral sources still know, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis, the evaluator will tell them, and now if they're too little, if the kids are too young to have any idea what's going on or to even care or remember, I'm going to set them aside. But if we've got preteens or teens or things like that, it's like, well, are mom and dad going to find out about what I have to say? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I will be sharing what you discuss with me with the court, and I will be writing a report, and I'll be sharing that with the court and with your mom and dad. Then to me, what happens is it's just a different form of recording. I'm not going to record your every word. I'm not going to have a camera on you, but I am going to be making notes. I am going to be thinking about this. I am going to be giving my opinions. And so the kids say, well, one way or another, what I say is going to get back to the court and to my parents. And the answer is yes, it will. So what I'm saying is, don't record me with a mechanical device that shows video or audio or both, because that will make me too nervous, self-conscious, or worried about retaliation or repercussions. But as long as there is no recording, this is what I think is going on. There's this element of, because there was no actual objective recording, we have this element of plausible deniability. Maybe the evaluator got it wrong. We'll never know because we made ourselves consciously ignorant of it. You see what I mean? And so it's like, well, the evaluator, we trust the evaluator. And I'm going, well, I'm not saying I trust or distrust the evaluator, but why would we make it a matter of trust when we can just have an objective recording? What's your take on that?
A recording or an interview is a data point. It offers different information. Ultimately, in a forensic evaluation, like a custody evaluation, there should be multiple data points. There should be preponderance of evidence, and comments certainly can be data points. I actually had someone critique my evaluation because I didn't record my interviews. It was a psychologist, and I assume by his critique that all other psychologists, as a standard of practice, are to record, but such things are not necessarily required of social workers or mental health counselors. It may just be professional standards that are different between those different bodies. I actually don't have a preference. Well, the truth is I do have a preference, and that's not to record. And it's a selfish reason. It's because storage is so much smaller for typed out information and notes that I'm taking, whereas it's massively much larger for recordings. And so to save my hard drive, I don't I don't desire to do recordings. Now, I'm not a lawyer. My purpose is data collection, um, and and psychometric testing, talking to references, looking for information from abuse reports to DCFS, police reports, whatever. I'm looking to answer 34 different factors where these parents are being measured against. And so I get to find evidence to support their viability in the factors or evidence against it. And let me rephrase that. Eric, I'm not actually trying to find evidence to support it. I'm only trying to find evidence to invalidate it, because by Utah law, there is a rebuttal presumption that parents get 50-50 parenting. And so from the very get-go, parents are deemed to be equally worthy of taking care of those children. Recording can be beneficial, I can understand that, but in my estimation, it produces extra work, and it's not for the evaluator. It would be for the courts. It would be for the lawyers. It would be for people refuting the evaluation, but frankly, they're not useful tools necessarily for the evaluator.
And I understand what you're saying. And so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is a recording for the purpose of this interview does not necessarily make a child or a collateral source dishonest. It could make somebody self-conscious, but the very act of being interviewed itself, recorded or not, could have the same effect. Is that accurate?
Um, I don't believe it would actually sway a person to honesty or dishonesty. They don't know me. They have no greater reason to be honest with me as a person versus me, a person recording them. I actually
Right.
don't believe it will greatly influence one way or the other, the content of the interview.
Okay. So those who say that a recording will have an artificial influence it will taint the nature of the evidence gathered because it would cause somebody to say, because I know there's a recording, I am, and because I'm afraid that others will, such as my parents, will be able to listen to the questions asked and the answers given, and I don't want people to know that, then I don't want to be recorded, because again, that way there's this element of plausible deniability. The court can say, well, the evaluator says that this question was asked and says that the child responded in this way, but maybe the child didn't. We'll never know. After all, it wasn't recorded. So we can, it's kind of funny. It's kind of like they can say, we're doing this to protect a child and letting the child feel comfortable, but it also gives us the ability to say, well, because there's no recording, I guess it's just a matter of who I believe and who I find to be credible. Meaning, hearsay within a hearsay situation where the evaluator says, I asked this question. Well, you say you did, we don't know, and this is the answer the child gave. Well, you say you did, but we don't know. And I find this is not the fault of the evaluator necessarily, but then the court can go, because there was no objectively verifiable reviewable record, we can just kind of go, all right, well, the evaluator says this was asked and this is answered this way, but I am going to see it differently. You could still do that with the recording. Somebody could say, for example, I will waste no time reading this. And you could interpret that to mean many things. Like, there's no need to read it, so I won't waste time. Or I'm just being condescending and saying, well, I will waste no time reading this. So I get that. But at least you have a record as opposed to somebody's secondhand account. And so I appreciate your candor with me, saying it's like, look, a recording in and of itself, in your opinion, doesn't make an interviewee any more or less truthful, just the mere fact of recording. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the other question I had for you is, you're saying as a mental health counselor in your work as an LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker, it's like, well, that's when you're doing counseling with people and you don't record. Is that mainly as a matter of confidentiality and privacy, and not so much because it's different from a forensic evaluation that you would conduct as a custody evaluator?
I don't believe it would necessarily get a social worker or mental health counselor in trouble. Um, I believe it's a matter of preference, and it could actually be a standard of practice, and that might be the difference right there.
But as you
Because
and let me just interrupt you. So, but as a custody evaluator, there's no standard you're aware of that says best practices or ethics require no audio or sound and visual recording can be made of interviews conducted in the course of a custody evaluation. Is that correct?
it is my understanding there are some unified guidelines. The AFCC, the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, provides guidelines on how to conduct evaluations. Um, this is actually a topic that I don't recall being brought up. I'm sure it's brought up somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
but again, this may actually be a matter of preference. Um, I think a different factor is when a person says something that then becomes a data point, whether it's written or recorded, but the interpretation of that data point is a different matter.
Right.
And so that becomes an issue.
And
Um,
let's note this. It's funny when people, we're victims of our technological age. people say, well, if it's recorded or written down, it's like both of which are a record, right? It's like there's the written record made by somebody in either real time or after the fact, or then there's that recording that's made by an audio recording, mechanical audio recording device or video recording device. And so there's a record made either way. It's just that one that is made by somebody's notes is something that's inherently subjective, whereas you've got a recording that's audio and or sound and visual that is objective. We know what was, we can hear the words, we can see the images. That still may be up to some measure of construction or interpretation, but as opposed to subjective, where it's like, as far as we know, you may not have even interviewed somebody because all we have is somebody's word, not necessarily you, Dennis, but somebody can say, I met with the neighbor and this is what the neighbor told me. And if we ever looked into it, finally, I was like, no, I was never interviewed and I never said that. Whereas if there was a recording, we could say, oh, as a matter of fact, that is that person. And those questions were asked and those answers were given. And that's the thing. That's the distinction I'm trying to make. Okay. Well, Dennis, as always, I'm grateful for your willingness to talk about these things and being so candid with us. It can't be said of all people that conduct evaluations. Some people are a little more protective of their fear that they may attract criticism or something like that by the legal profession or by those that appoint custody evaluators. So for those of you watching and listening, it's very courageous of Dennis to do this, not because he's doing something wrong or inherently bad, but just because offering frank opinions is not something that's always welcome in this area. So we thank you for that. Before we go, again, for anyone that would like to talk to you or utilize your services as a counselor or custody evaluator, would you give us your contact information one last time?
Eric, my phone number is 801-979-0610. My email is new.evals@gmail.com. My website is nbeval.com.
Thanks.
Thank
And
you
we
for
will put
having
that
me.
up in a written card at the end of this interview for those of you watching it, if you need to just pause it to jot that down. Dennis, as always, it's a pleasure.
Eric, you too.